Welcome to Chapel Today. Today we begin by acknowledging that at Calvin Christian Collegiate, we work, rest, study, and worship on Treaty 1 land and drink Treaty 3 water. By naming these treaties, we seek reconciliation, relationships, and respect for covenants that were formed between Indigenous settler peoples.
We honor the ways that Indigenous communities in Manitoba have worked in the land in the past, and dedicate ourselves to foster positive relationships and reconciliation now and in the future. May we grow and learn together.
If I could choose just a single element of the traditional teachings that we're called to pick up, it would be the teachings of the honorable harvest, which were taught us by the plants, who give us everything that we need. It's a covenant of reciprocity between humans and the living world, a very sophisticated ethical protocol. One of the first steps of the honorable harvest is to understand that the lives that we are taking are the lives of generous beings, of sovereign beings. And in order to accept their gift, we owe them at least our attention. To care for them, we must know what they need. And at the very minimum, we should know their names. And yet, the average American can name over 100 corporate logos and 10 plants. Is it a surprise that we have accepted a political system that grants personhood to corporations and no status at all for wild rice and redwoods? The protocols for the honorable harvest are not really written down, but if they were, it would look something like this. When you get to the woods, you don't just start grabbing everything in sight. We're taught never to take the first plant that you see, and that means you'll never take the last. This is a prescription with inherent conservation value. And then if we encounter another plant, we ask permission. I've always been taught to address that plant, to introduce myself and tell it what it is that I have come for. If you're going to take a life, you have to be personally accountable for it. I know there are places where if you talk to a plant, they think you are crazy, but in our way, it's just good manners. If you're going to ask, you have to listen for the answer. You can listen in different ways, pragmatically, intuitively. Look around, see whether those plants have enough to share. And if the answer is no, you go home. For we remember that they don't belong to us. And taking without permission is also known as stealing. And the Honorable Harvest counsels that we also take in such a way that does the least harm and in a way that benefits the growth of the plant. Use everything that you take. It's disrespectful of the life that's given to waste it. The next tenet of the honorable harvest is to share it with others, human and non. The earth has shared generously with us, so we have to model that behavior in return. And a culture of sharing, we know, is a culture of resilience. Plant gatherers often leave a spiritual gift behind, but it can also be a material gift. Weeding, caretaking, spreading seeds, helping those plants to flourish. We give songs, we give ceremony, we give our respect, we give fertilizer. Every breath that you take is a breath that was made for you by plants. On the water that you drink, whether you're in an urban setting, whether you're on a remote mountaintop, we still are recipients of those gifts. And if we take the time to be grateful, that brings us into that state of humility, of understanding that we are not at the top of a biological hierarchy, that in fact we are the younger brothers of creation.
Today's chapel is for the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. And as Christians, we want to think about how we can participate in making things right from all the wrong that was done by the church in the past and the government in the past. And so to start with that today, we're going to look at what Jesus did. How did Jesus live? When Jesus began his ministry, it says in Luke 14 that he went to the temple and he unfurled the scroll, this prophecy from Isaiah, and he spoke saying, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And so what we see in Jesus is this constant making the wrong things right, healing the brokenhearted, restoring sight to the blind, bringing freedom to captives. And we see that throughout Jesus' ministry in the Gospels. And it's a consistent pattern where wrong things are made right. And so as Christians, we want to respond the same way to the broken things that we see in our world. But what does it take to make wrong things right? What did Jesus expect of people who had done something wrong or people who had benefited from things that were done wrong? Well, two things we see throughout Scripture is that it requires the ability to be able to see what we did wrong. That Jesus actually spoke truth when he saw something being done that was wrong or hurtful or damaging. Jesus called out the different Pharisees and leaders in the Jewish community when they weren't taking care of the widow and the orphans, when there were broken families and they weren't caring for them, when they cared more about their own holiness rather than the needs of the people around them. Jesus always invited everyone to be in relationship with him as well, even the poor, even the oppressed, those who were on the margins of society and didn't really belong to the community. Jesus invited every single person to be in relationship with him. And so we see that Jesus actually practiced truth and he practiced reconciliation. He gave us that example. We also see more of how we should live as Christians and how we can respond to the brokenness in our world from the Apostle Paul. Specifically in Philippians 2, verse 3, it says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others." And this idea of humility is really important when it comes to truth and reconciliation. When settlers came to Canada, they did not come in humility. They came looking for something for themselves. And that's not wrong in and of itself, but they came and saw a different way of life and a different group of people and thought, oh, well, we know a better way to do it. We know how they ought to do it. Our way is superior. And rather than in humility, working together with the people who already lived here, they forced them to try to assimilate to their way of living. And that arrogance led to violence and destruction. It destroyed families, it destroyed communities, it destroyed culture. And with the death of all these children in the residential schools and the destruction of the ways of life, we actually ended up losing a lot of wisdom that we can gain because we really need each other. We don't need just people who all think the same or people who all look the same. We need each other to learn the whole picture of God's goodness and God's wisdom. So today, for the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, to honor the loss of that wisdom and to honor those who survived the schools and continue to offer their wisdom and their truth and their goodness to us as a community, we want to highlight Indigenous ways of knowing in our community. We want to highlight Indigenous wisdom that we have missed out on in the past because of residential schools. We need each other, and so we all want to learn from one another to take part in reconciliation.
Malian had asked to be the last one to do her presentation. "Are you sure you won't be nervous?" her teacher had asked. "No," she said. "Waiting is something you get used to when you're Native American." Her teacher had started to laugh, then caught herself. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't mean to make light of your people's history." "It's okay to laugh," Malian said. "That was a joke, sort of." Of the 20 kids in her class, only 15 were able to get online for their presentation. Each one was just 10 minutes long with a 2-minute break in between. Malian was glad she was last. It made it easier for her to really listen to what each of her classmates had to share. Finally, it was Malian's turn. She thought a lot about what she was going to say. There were so many things her teachers and classmates did not know, but the question was, which things would she share? She didn't want to make people feel bad, but she also wanted to be honest. Should she tell them about the time 2 centuries ago when the colonial government offered bounties for Indian scalps? She had decided not to tell that story. It would be too hard for them to take. She took a deep breath and began to talk. She told them how her own mother was taken from her family and adopted out. She told them about the boarding schools where her grandparents were forbidden to speak their language and were told to be ashamed of their own culture. "Those were the old days, not the good old days," she said, and then she smiled. "No one should feel guilty about the past, unless they're not doing anything about the present. That's what my grandparents say. Think about what we are doing now and how it will affect the world 7 generations from today. We have to think, my grandparents say, about every living thing, about all of our relations.
So throughout today's chapel, you'll see different bits and pieces of Indigenous wisdom being shared in different ways. Some of it will come from this book called Res Dogs by Joseph Bruchac, and some of it will be wisdom shared by the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin Wall Kimmerer, and Indigenous scientists. So let's see what you can learn in today's chapel.
Although I'm trained as a scientist, I am coming to understand that the greatest influence I can have is as a storyteller and as a writer. Sometimes people think that what I'm talking about is promoting Indigenous science over Western science. But what I'm really working toward is a relationship between them. It's this powerful invitation to look at the world through multiple streams of knowledge, not just one. Bonjour, Ani, Shabadaske Gish Kokoi Nadeshnakas. My name is Robin Wall Kimmerer, and I'm a plant ecologist, educator, and a writer. Traditional ecological knowledge is both a way of knowing and a whole body of knowledge, of understanding the relationships in the living world. This is collective knowledge that has been generated over millennia. Remembering that there was a time in our history when traditional ecological knowledge was intentionally erased through assimilation of our children, I feel a deep responsibility to the restoration, revitalization, and carrying forward of our knowledge. These combined crises of biodiversity loss on the edge of climate catastrophe, they have all come because we treat the earth as if it were our property. So the covenant of reciprocity says that there is no ecological system on earth that can persist if all we do is take. We always have to replenish. I've heard our elders say that one of the reasons that our people held on to our traditional knowledge and teachings against all odds was that one day there would come a time when all of the world was in need of this wisdom. I think that time is now.
Grateful today to have Jen Mason here with us. She's a parent from the Calvin Christian community, and she's also works with Inner City Youth Alive, and so she's got lots of experience with difficult conversations, and she's done a lot of thinking about reconciliation and what that means both in her community and also part of our school community. So thank you so much for joining us here today. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm always grateful when Calvin is having these conversations. As all of our kids come here, it's important to us for them to know that they're welcome and it's a safe place.
So we've got more than one person here with us as well. We have some students and another staff member as well, because we'd like to listen and learn together. And sometimes reconciliation requires talking, and sometimes it requires listening. So you might not hear from each of them or see each of them, but we're doing this work here together, and we wanted to start that this way today. So I wondered, Jen, just to start us off, could you describe what you think of when you think of reconciliation, or what it means to you, or what you think it should look like?
Reconciliation is a very big and difficult thing to try and fit into our small brains. for me, and in one voice, I'm not my people, I am a single voice who happens to be Anishinaabe. For me, as a Jesus follower, I think that we have a responsibility to be in right relationship, and reconciliation is about being in right relationship. And for so long, the narrative, particularly from Christians, was that anything to do with culture is evil and it'll lead us astray. And I was well taught it. I believed all of that. I believed to be a good Jesus follower, I had to learn how to be white. That was the way to be a good Christian. I had to learn how to be white. And God has spent years telling me differently. And I am discovering that cultural teachings and ways of being and ways of knowing fit into the Word. And I think it makes me, in terms of history, it makes me sad because there was such opportunity, because it was all there, and all that needed to be brought was the name of Jesus. And that's still missing a lot. It's not a foregone thing. I still encounter people in our home church who would think that dream catchers and paintings and drums are things of the devil, while they are tools, actually they are pictures, images, displays of the gifts that God gives us as people.
Reconciliation to me, so being part of this Christian community, I didn't grow up in culture. I am learning now culture. I'm Anishinaabe as well. And so I didn't know that I was Indigenous until I was 12. And so that was, getting to know my aunties and my uncles and knowing who that's part of reconciliation for me, is to connect back to my culture. So I have gone to sweats, and I do have my Indigenous name, which is Miskadase Gabimishe, which means I'm still learning all of the language, and it's kind of hard because through assimilation, the language they tried to kill the language. And so lots of the elders know the language, but they don't have it written down. And so as a French teacher, as a person who loves languages, this was really close to my heart to know what my actual name meant. And it's a snapping turtle that flies. But then as I'm learning more about it, it's actually has the Gapimishid part, or that part has to do with being a mother turtle. So it was kind of cool how I'm learning that part of it, and it makes sense. When we were in the sweat, right, he was like, you have intuition and dreams, and don't be afraid of those, because as a Christian, I was told as well, right, that is of the devil. If you have any kind of sight, or if you have any kind of intuition, let that go. And so he was like, don't be afraid of that. That's a gift. And I love the way that that we talk about God and it being a creator. And I do believe that God is our creator, right? And Jesus is the one who has come. And so being a Jesus girl and being an Anishinaabe and trying to reconcile those together and know that it's all part of my spirituality, not necessarily a religion, So spirituality to me is so much more than religiosity, if that makes sense. That's the rules, the things that we have to follow. And this is more about being spiritually connected to my ancestors, and my ancestors on all sides of my family. Yeah. So that's kind of what reconciliation means to me.
So what have you guys learned about reconciliation from Jesus?
Jesus was all about relationship, right? He didn't spend his time in the synagogues with the people that were very well versed in scripture and all of the teachings and the rules. He spent his time walking with people and living with people and eating with people and just being in relationship. And because they, so many of them knew the Torah, knew the teachings, that like this is important to them. He spent time trying to tell them, you don't quite get it, right? And so, like, when I think that a good lesson in reconciliation is the Good Samaritan, because that in life, and we do it as Christians. We do it as Christians where we are good friends with people at church, and if they stop coming for a few Sundays, I can't be a friend anymore. And that isn't what brings people back to Jesus. That isn't what that's what drives people away. And I think that reconciliation between Canada and the First Peoples is that where I don't really want to walk on the same side of the street as you. And as Jesus people, we should know that he dined with tax collectors and all of the unsavory people, right? Like, and I don't think that Jesus's ragtag group would be welcome in a lot of our churches, and that's an overall statement. But if we can't do that well within the church, how do we do that well in cross-cultural situations with people that believe in Creator but don't yet know Jesus? So I think that reconciliation should be being learned. It should be coming from out of the church. It should be us that are saying, look, this is how we do it well. It should be us that are standing with people and saying, like, I agree that you have value despite your brown skin. And that these laws that are in place for centuries are wrong, and because that's what we're called to do as Jesus people.
So for me, when you ask the question of what do I learn from Jesus for reconciliation, right? He came here, and the people who were putting him down, they were shouting for his life, and he still died for all of us. Like, he laid his life down, even though he did nothing wrong. He laid his life down for us. And so for reconciliation for me is that, I can understand as a history person who looks at history, I can understand where their viewpoints were skewed. They came over with these ideals or whatever. They had their experience, but they didn't open their minds to what the possibilities could be. So I'm thinking that he taught me that I have to think about where they are coming from. They do not know what they do. Do you know what I mean? Like that thing, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. They didn't know, and you can't do what you don't know, right? So the best thing I think that we can learn from history, though, is to not repeat it. We know where it's coming from. So reconciliation on that part is, let's have a conversation. Let's stop. I brought my aunties to church with me, and people, because I have the ability to blend in. I'm not dark enough to be Indigenous fully, but I'm not white enough to be fully white. So I have this chameleon type thing that goes about it. So people don't necessarily know that my aunties, they look Indigenous, because they're more Indigenous, as we have broken families, they're from a little bit different fathers, whatever. And so it's like they come to church and they're like, oh, who are these people? And I'm like, these are my aunties, right? Like these are, I didn't know you were Indigenous. Nobody knows. So I tell everybody so they know. But that's what I think I would learn from Jesus is they didn't know what they were doing. And so I need to give them grace and people grace. But you know now, right? Like there's lots of information. So go out and look for it. Don't be ignorant to not know the information now, right? Because there's lots of places where you can go. There's lots of people you can talk to. Don't say I didn't know now. That's what I would say Jesus taught me.
What you shared there about Jesus' sacrifice on the cross being something that you learned, I thought, there's like Jesus' sacrifice on the cross actually meets every single one of us wherever we are in the reconciliation conversation, right? It meets people who have to say, forgive them for they don't know not what they do, right? Who have been hurt and harmed. But it also meets someone like me whose ancestors came to Canada and they were like, ooh, we get great land from Canada, except for the land had been taken from people so that my Mennonite ancestors could farm it. And so people like to say, well, it's not my fault. Like, I didn't do it. And I didn't. But can I, like Jesus, sacrificially lay it down and be like, this, I need to do something differently. I need to either reparation in some way, right? Give back in some way because I directly benefited from the way that your families suffered, right? And so both of us can learn from Jesus. I mean, I think that's pretty cool how Jesus does that, right? Like, it's not just for one set of people, right? Like we all have something to learn from Jesus and how we love each other and make things right again.
So how do we move forward? And is there any practical ways that as most of us are white teenagers, and is there any like practical ways that we can seek truth and reconciliation in our daily lives?
We said before, there's no reason for people to be uneducated about things anymore. It is an age of information. Everything is at our fingertips, and there are tons of papers, of documents, of videos, of all kinds of things. And so we should be educated about things. It is not easy to read and learn about Canada's history because it's not good. And what has been told for so long, history is written by the victors, right? So it is a one-sided story. It is the hard things, the maybe terrible things that were done have we're the heroes spin on them, right? And so I think being willing to even if it's like, well, this is what I was taught, well, it doesn't necessarily mean we're always taught the right thing. So I think that you asking the question is exactly what needs to happen, is people need to ask questions. I find that when you can sit and talk with me and ask me and see and put a face to things, works a lot better than sitting and reading a book. And it is a lot harder to explain or excuse away things. Well, I didn't do that. It was my family, it was whoever. And the reality is, those people were running from persecution. They needed something. Like, this is a safe place, you don't consider what it's taken for it to be a safe place for you, right? You just realize, I can breathe, I can have a home, I can have, but yeah, having a relationship with people that might look a little bit different than you, on all fronts, is always a good thing. And being willing to hear people's stories and to ask questions. It's also important to note to do that well, because expecting that I can walk up to you and say, well, why is it the way it is? And tell me your story is your obligation. And that is imposing labor on you. That's imposing, and that's not a good way to do it, right? But in general, people are, you get to know them and you start realizing, this is not what I thought. This is not what I was told. This is not, and it's the same as anything in life. Everything comes from relationship.
I'm going to kind of go off of what you had said about, you can't just expect to go up to someone and say, hey, were you a residential school survivor? Let's talk about that. Like, without a relationship, right? And I think you had said that at the beginning too, right? Like, you build a relationship with someone. And I think that as well is what Jesus can teach us. He didn't come in, okay, he's God, right? He could have come here and went, this is what you're doing. He didn't. He came as a baby and he created relationships and he grew up and he learned how to be human. So if you have never had a relationship with a Indigenous person, you don't know anyone, right? You do have a relationship with me. I could tell you my story. That's something that's good to do, right? However, you're not going to go up to an elder and just expect them. First of all, you're not honoring them, right? And I think this year, and the theme is like honoring the survivors, honor their stories. Some of these stories are not easy to talk about. They come with generations of trauma. That's a lot, right? Some people have not worked through that trauma on their own, so they are not able to share that with you. And just being open to, like you said, right? Being open to listen, but also to understand where you are and what kind of privilege, sorry, I'm going to use the word, what kind of privilege you have. I do share in that privilege that I don't have the dark enough skin. So I can share in that privilege of not being followed when I'm in a mall while I'm shopping. I have the privilege of not being thought of as a bad mother because my kids are running around like crazy, right? They don't give me the same looks that I have seen other people from my culture who have gotten, like, oh my goodness, like that person can't manage their kids when kids are not easy. So I feel like, how can you guys help? Well, you can use your voices. You can use your questions. You can use your privilege to help to, if you have someone in your class who might need your help, stand with them, right? Stand up with them and go, listen, you don't know their story and you don't know this person. This is a person, right? Don't make it about a culture.
I think the other thing that we can do if we're looking to try to actually take action on reconciliation is just be willing to be uncomfortable. Like, a lot of us are just not willing to be uncomfortable, right? Like, even this conversation, it was kind of hard to get students to sit here and want to be here because it's not an easy conversation and it's scary to be part of it, which is why we wanted to make a safe place just to listen as well. But most of us would choose comfort over discomfort, and most of us will choose convenience over inconvenience. And so we need to kind of practice that muscle of being uncomfortable. And like you said, standing up for somebody in your class who needs help. It doesn't have to be necessarily about this, but it can just practicing that muscle of being willing to be uncomfortable for the sake of someone else, to show love to someone else, is a really important thing to develop.
My father went to residential school, and during that time he was very mistreated. And before my father died in 1999, he called me to come to his home because he had something to tell me. And he said, "Son, someday there's going to be a discovery that takes place in Canada." He said, and when this discovery is uncovered, he said it's going to change the way this nation is. He said it's going to change things. I thought of that, so many times as when I wrote this song 2 days before the discovery of what took place in Kamloops. All those memories came rushing back to me, that was what my father was talking about. And I believe God has given us as Canadians and as First Nations people both an opportunity to get it right and to see healing happen in this land. We're here to honor you. We're gathered here by love to honor life, the sacred gift you breathe into us. As the sacred fire burns, the fragrance fills the air. The sun comes up in the east and our prayers rise to you. Our prayers rise to you. We sing, we dance, we wait for healing in our land. We sing, we dance, we wait for healing in our land. Healing in our land. We're not blind to injustice, we reach out our hands. The wall, it must be broken, and love will heal our land. We face the deeds of the past, today dawns a new day. We can't fight dark with darkness, love will bring the light. We step into the light. We sing, we dance, we wait for healing in our land. We sing, we dance, we wait for healing in our land.
Mrs. Mason, I just want to thank you for being willing to share with us. I loved that you were able to give us so many insights and even just practical insights that we can do simple things like ask questions and just listen and be willing. Thank you so much.
So yeah, I'll just close off our conversation with a prayer. So God, we come to you and we've learned so much from this conversation. And God, I pray that you would help us to develop relationships with the Indigenous people around in our lives, in our communities, sports, at school, God. I pray that we would be able to ask questions and that we wouldn't be too shy or too nervous to want to find out their story, God, and to learn more of the history and the ways that we can move forward. And God, I pray that we would pattern our lives after you and how you lived on the earth. Jesus, you had relationship with a whole bunch of people. You weren't just with the top people in society. Like you had relationship with everyone, and you got to know them and you got to know their story, and you loved them the same amount as everyone else. And God, I pray that, we would be able to move forward in a spirit of truth and reconciliation, but not just because it's a priority for our country, that it's the right thing to do in society now, but that because we are actually curious and we actually want to love them and we actually want to be like you, God. So in Jesus' name, amen.
if Canada chooses rather to have tears and mourning, and to mourn with its First Nations people, and then reconstruct our relationship in a new way, I believe that we're going to be able to see a healing that takes place. So right now, as you finish listening to this song, I ask you just for a second to pray and ask, what's your part to play? What's your part to play for the healing of Canada?